The Ascent of Mount Carmel by St. John of the Cross. Book 1, Chapter 12, which treats of the answer to another question, explaining what the desires are that suffice to cause the evils aforementioned in the soul. We might write at greater length upon this matter of the night of sense, saying all that there is to say concerning the harm which is caused by the desires, not only in the ways aforementioned, but in many others. But for our purpose, what has been said suffices, for we believe we have made it clear in what way the mortification of these desires is called night, and how it behoves us to enter this night in order to journey to God. The only thing that remains before we treat of the manner of entrance therein, in order to bring this part to a close, is a question concerning what has been said, which might occur to the reader. It may first be asked if any desire can be sufficient to work and produce in the soul the two evils aforementioned, namely, the privative, which consists of depriving the soul of the grace of God, and the positive, which consists in producing within it the 5 serious evils whereof we have spoken. Secondly, it may be asked if any desire, however slight it be, and of whatever kind, suffices to produce all these together, or if some desires produce some, and others produce others. If, for example, some produce torment, others weariness, others darkness, etc. Answering this question, I say, first of all, that with respect to the privative evil, which consists in the soul's being deprived of God, this is wrought wholly, and can only be wrought by the voluntary desires, which are of the matter of mortal sin, for they deprive the soul of grace in this life, and of glory, which is the possession of God, in the next. In the second place, I say that both those desires which are of the matter of mortal sin, and the voluntary desires which are of the matter of venial sin, and those that are of the matter of imperfection, are each sufficient to produce in the soul all of those positive evils together, the which evils, although in a certain way they are privative, we here call positive, since they correspond to a turning towards the creature, even as the privative evils correspond to a turning away from God. But there is this difference, that the desires which are of mortal sin produce total blindness, torment, impurity, weakness, etc. Those others, however, which are of the matter of venial sin or imperfection, produce not these evils in a complete and supreme degree, since they deprive not the soul of grace, upon the loss of which depends the possession of them, since the death of the soul is their life. But they produce them in the soul remissly, proportionately to the remission of grace which these desires produce in the soul. So that desire which most weakens grace will produce the most abundant torment, blindness, and defilement. It should be noted, however, that although each desire produces all these evils, which we here term positive, there are some which, principally and directly, produce some of them, and others which produce others, and the remainder are produced consequently upon these. For although it is true that one sensual desire produces all these evils, yet its principal and proper effect is the defilement of soul and body. And although one avaricious desire produces them all, its principal and direct result is to produce misery. And although, similarly, one vainglorious desire produces them all, its principal and direct result is to produce darkness and blindness. And although one gluttonous desire produces them all, its principal result is to produce lukewarmness in virtue. And even so is it with all the rest. And the reason why any act of voluntary desire produces in the soul all these effects together lies in the direct contrariety which exists between them and all the acts of virtue which produce the contrary effects in the soul. For even as an act of virtue produces and begets in the soul sweetness, peace, consolation, light, cleanness, and fortitude all together, even so an unruly desire causes torment, fatigue, weariness, blindness, and weakness. All the virtues grow through the practice of any one of them, and all the vices grow through the practice of any one of them likewise, and the remnants of each grow in the soul. And although all these evils are not evident at the moment when the desire is indulged, since the resulting pleasure gives no occasion for them, yet the evil remnants which they leave are clearly perceived, whether before or afterwards. This is very well illustrated by that book which the angel commanded St. John to eat in the Apocalypse, the which book was sweetness in his mouth, and in his belly bitterness. For the desire, when it is carried into effect, is sweet and appears to be good, but its bitter taste is felt afterwards. The truth of this can be clearly proved by anyone who allows himself to be led away by it. Yet I am not ignorant that there are some men so blind and insensible as not to feel this, for as they do not walk in God, they are unable to perceive that which hinders them from approaching him. I am not writing here of the other natural desires which are not voluntary, and of thoughts that go not beyond the first movements, and other temptations to which the soul is not consenting, for these produce in the soul none of the evils aforementioned. For although a person who suffers from them may think that the passion and disturbance which they then produce in him are defiling and blinding him, this is not the case. Rather, they are bringing him the opposite advantages. For in so far as he resists them, he gains fortitude, purity, light, and consolation, and many blessings, even as our Lord said to St. Paul, that virtue was made perfect in weakness. But the voluntary desires work all the evils aforementioned, and more. Wherefore the principal care of spiritual masters is to mortify their disciples immediately with respect to any desire soever, by causing them to remain without the objects of their desires, in order to free them from such great misery. Chapter 13, wherein is described the manner and way which the soul must follow in order to enter this night of sense. It now remains for me to give certain counsels whereby the soul may know how to enter this night of sense, and may be able so to do. To this end, it must be known that the soul habitually enters this night of sense in two ways. The one is active, the other passive. The active way consists in that which the soul can do and does of itself in order to enter therein, whereof we shall now treat in the counsels which follow. The passive way is that wherein the soul does nothing, and God works in it, and it remains, as it were, patient. Of this we shall treat in the 4th book, where we shall be treating of beginners. And because there, with the divine favor, we shall give many counsels to beginners, according to the many imperfections which they are apt to have while on this road, I shall not spend time in giving many here. And this too, because it belongs not to this place to give them, as at present we are treating only of the reasons for which this journey is called a night, and of what kind it is, and how many parts it has. But as it seems that it would be incomplete and less profitable than it should be if we gave no help or counsel here for walking in this night of desires, I have thought well to set down briefly here the way which is to be followed. And I shall do the same at the end of each of the next 2 parts, or causes, of this night, whereof, with the help of the Lord, I have to treat. These counsels for the conquering of the desires which now follow, albeit brief and few, I believe to be as profitable and efficacious as they are concise, so that one who sincerely desires to practice them will need no others, but will find them all included in these. First, let him have a habitual desire to imitate Christ in everything that he does, conforming himself to his life, upon which life he must meditate, so that he may know how to imitate it, and to behave in all things as Christ would behave. Secondly, in order that he may be able to do this well, every pleasure that presents itself to the senses, if it be not purely for the honor and glory of God, must be renounced and completely rejected for the love of Jesus Christ, who in this life had no other pleasure, neither desired any, than to do the will of his Father, which he called his meat and food. I take this example. If there present itself to a man the pleasure of listening to things that tend not to the service and honor of God, let him not desire that pleasure, nor desire to listen to them. And if there present itself the pleasure of looking at things that help him not Godward, let him not desire the pleasure, or look at these things. And if in conversation, or in anything else soever, such pleasure present itself, let him act likewise. And similarly with respect to all the senses, in so far as he can fairly avoid the pleasure in question. If he cannot, it suffices that, although these things may be present to his senses, he should desire not to have this pleasure. And in this wise he will be able to mortify and void his senses of such pleasure, as though they were in darkness. If he takes care to do this, he will soon reap great profit. For the mortifying and calming of the 4 natural passions, which are joy, hope, fear, and grief, from the concord and pacification whereof come these and other blessings, the counsels here following are of the greatest help, and of great merit, and the source of great virtues. Strive always to prefer not that which is easiest, but that which is most difficult, not that which is most delectable, but that which is most unpleasing, not that which gives most pleasure, but rather that which gives least, not that which is restful, but that which is wearisome, not that which is consolation, but rather that which is disconsolateness, not that which is greatest, but that which is least, not that which is loftiest and most precious, but that which is lowest and most despised, not that which is a desire for anything, but that which is a desire for nothing. Strive to go about seeking not the best of temporal things, but the worst. Strive thus to desire to enter into complete detachment and emptiness and poverty with respect to everything that is in the world, for Christ's sake. And it is meet that the soul embrace these acts with all its heart, and strive to subdue its will thereto. For if it perform them with its heart, it will very quickly come to find in them great delight and consolation, and to act with order and discretion. These things that have been said, if they be faithfully put into practice, are quite sufficient for entrance into the night of sense. But for greater completeness, we shall describe another kind of exercise, which teaches us to mortify the concupiscence of the flesh, and the concupiscence of the eyes, and the pride of life, which, says St. John, are the things which reign in the world, from which all the other desires proceed. First, let the soul strive to work in its own despite, and desire all to do so. Secondly, let it strive to speak in its own despite, and desire all to do so. Third, let it strive to think humbly of itself in its own despite, and desire all to do so. To conclude these counsels and rules, it will be fitting to set down here those lines which are written in the Ascent of the Mount, which is the figure that is at the beginning of this book, the which lines are instructions for ascending to it, and thus reaching the summit of union. For although it is true that that which is there spoken of is spiritual and interior, there is reference likewise to the spirit of imperfection, according to sensual and exterior things, as may be seen by the two roads which are on either side of the path of perfection. It is in this way, and according to this sense, that we shall understand them here, that is to say, according to that which is sensual. Afterwards, in the second part of this night, they will be understood according to that which is spiritual. The lines are these: in order to arrive at having pleasure in everything, desire to have pleasure in nothing. In order to arrive at possessing everything, desire to possess nothing. In order to arrive at being everything, desire to be nothing. In order to arrive at knowing everything, desire to know nothing. In order to arrive at that wherein thou hast no pleasure, thou must go by a way wherein thou hast no pleasure. In order to arrive at that which thou knowest not, thou must go by a way that thou knowest not. In order to arrive at that which thou possessest not, thou must go by a way that thou possessest not. In order to arrive at that which thou art not, thou must go through that which thou art not. When thy mind dwells upon anything, thou art ceasing to cast thyself upon the all. For in order to pass from the all to the all, thou hast to deny thyself wholly in all. And when thou comest to possess it wholly, thou must possess it without desiring anything. For if thou wilt have anything in having all, thou hast not thy treasure purely in God. In this detachment the spiritual soul finds its quiet and repose. For since it covets nothing, nothing wearies it when it is lifted up, and nothing oppresses it when it is cast down, because it is in the center of its humility. But when it covets anything, at that very moment it becomes wearied. End of chapter 13.